someone first thinks, I may need to separate or divorce, what are they usually afraid of before they ever say it out loud?
I don't know what to expect and what's going to happen. Don't make a lawyer your first call. We were sitting in the lawyer's office and this individual was telling him the details of her husband. Basically, it was expensive therapy. The individual said, when I was walking down the aisle, I questioned this relationship. But I'm always surprised by the number of people who tell me they kind of knew from the beginning.
What do parents typically misunderstand about the impact of divorce on their kids?
They actually asked their parents to get a divorce because they couldn't handle it. I have a client, he lived in a beautiful large house and he had to.
When divorce becomes a real possibility, the questions can feel heavy and fast. What happens to the kids? Do I stay because it feels safer? How do I make clear decisions when everything feels emotional? Jackie Santin is an executive divorce coach who helps people move through separation and divorce with more clarity, strategy, and support. This conversation is about divorce, family, identity, and learning how to lead yourself through a life you did not expect. Where I wanted to start with this, Jackie, is when someone first thinks, I may need to separate or divorce, what are they usually afraid of before they ever say it out loud?
That's a great question. So, we always say divorce is like a fingerprint. Every divorce is different. And when people come to me, there are different challenges they have. But if I had to distill it down to one, I would say the fear or the thought that everyone has the most is, what is going to happen in my life? The decision to separate or divorce, it carries enormous weight. So when someone makes that decision, they don't make it lightly, and they know it is going to impact everything. It's going to impact their spouse, clearly, children, the matrimonial home, their friends, their extended family. There is a ripple effect to that decision being made. So when I hear men and women come to me with those challenges, it usually comes down to, I don't know what to expect and what's going to happen. And the beauty of working with someone like me is that you don't have to have all the answers at the beginning. Like before you take that first step, there are so many things swirling in your head, and I see it all the time. And one of the first things I get my clients to do is write everything down. Just get a piece of paper, and oftentimes it's paper after paper, but write all of your concerns, your questions, get them out to start, because you want to sort of clear your head. And so once that's done, my role then is to help them slow it down, to look at all of their concerns, questions. Some of those questions may be for me if it's a process perspective or they want to understand next steps. Sometimes they're for a lawyer if they have specific questions about their case, child support, spousal support, and sometimes it's for a financial expert. But we work together to do that step by step, so they understand their options and they're making those decisions with clarity. So again, when they come with that first question, it's so loaded and there's so many things that are happening to them that just to slow it down and to document really helps them sort of move forward in this process.
So what are some of those questions that they're asking themselves, or you, I guess when you're asking them to write them down, what are the questions that they're coming up with initially?
Yeah, I think, I get individuals in all stages of divorce, and oftentimes I'll get clients saying, I'm not sure if I want to leave. I'm not sure if I should leave. And in those situations, it always comes back to, talk to a therapist. Let's talk out why you want to leave, why you don't want to leave. Is this something I can support with? Is this something that you need a therapist to help you with? And we get to a place where I say to them, unless every bone in your body is telling you to leave, don't leave, because this decision is huge and you have to be 100% confident with it before you make that step. So I would say that is probably one of the biggest pieces for people who are not ready to leave yet. For those who come and say, I'm ready to go, but I'm worried, like, what about my matrimonial home? Am I going to lose the home? I worry about my children. Are they going to be okay in all of this? And so many questions about all of the specifics too, like how much child support am I going to get? How much spousal support am I going to get? I have women, I work with a lot of very successful women who are sometimes the breadwinners, and their concern is, do I have to pay my spousal support, right? Do I have to support him? So all these questions come out, and what the beauty of in this forum is that we work together and you get it all out. if you make your first step a lawyer, and for those who follow me on LinkedIn, that's one of my something that I talk about all the time is don't make a lawyer your first call. Because as soon as you engage a lawyer, you are paying legal fees. You have to put down, obviously money for your retainer, and all of that it stays until the case is done. So it's quite an investment at the beginning. If you bring all of this, your concerns, your worries, those aren't legal concerns, right? Those are things that you need someone to help you unpack and coordinate and organize. If you bring that to a lawyer, and when I first started doing this 20 plus years ago, I saw it firsthand. I lived and breathed the first divorce that I helped support. And we were sitting in the lawyer's office, and this individual was telling him the details of her husband, the infidelity and what he did. And it was awful what she went through, 100%. But we spent over an hour, which I mean, and back then was a few $100s. Now it's $500-600. Basically, it was expensive therapy. She spent an hour with a lawyer that didn't need to be spent with a lawyer. And so after that, we made sure that we regulated her before she went to the lawyer, so that wouldn't happen anymore. So again, by coming to a divorce coach, what we do is we get you organized, we get you emotionally regulated, we help you understand the process so that everything is so clear in your head when you go and meet with your lawyer or with your mortgage advisor to find out if you can afford your marital home or if you should be selling it, or talking to a real estate agent, the value of your home. All those experts that I help you bring in are the ones that then help you unpack that. So again, that's where I noticed this gap years ago, this gap of before you go to a lawyer, who's going to help you, right? And so
Yeah.
that's when I discovered divorce coaching. And honestly, I see a value in it, and I live and breathe it every day.
So there's obviously a new step that people really should consider, which is going to a divorce coach, having that conversation before going to a lawyer. But before that, you said something that I was stuck on. You said when people think they're ready or know they're ready, how does somebody who is in a marriage or in a relationship know they're ready for a divorce? How would they figure that out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And oftentimes, I have clients coming to me and they want to talk it out. And when we actually get to the core of it, what's stopping a lot of them is the process, the fear of the process, the fear of the unknown. But when we dial it back and say, okay, here's how all of that works. Now let's put that aside and let's talk about your marriage. Like, what do you see? Do you see a future? Do you see? And when we start to talk that through, if they say, I think so, like if only we could fix this, or if only it was that, then they themselves start to realize they're not ready. If they say, oh, no, like, I don't even want to be in a room with him. I don't like him as a person, and you hear these things, it's pretty obvious as they start to articulate their feelings, they themselves start to put together, what, this isn't for me. This isn't right. And I've said this earlier too. Sometimes we can't get to the core of it when we're talking. And I'm not a therapist, and I know the lanes that I stay in, and that's one that I don't go into. It's not my area of expertise, but I will recommend a therapist if they're not seeing one. And in that situation, they can get sometimes really deep to the core of what's happening. But I will say this, of all the clients I've worked with, of all the ones that I've supported when they've come to me and said, I want to leave, this marriage isn't working, not one has ever gone back on that. So I've never had a client go back to the relationship, or once they decide it's over, there's no looking back and there's no regrets in my experience.
So then talk about what you do then. So when you talk about moving towards yourself prior to going to a lawyer, when that person has made that decision, what is your role? Like, what do you do in that in between stage for them?
So, as a divorce coach, probably the first step, if I think about almost every one of my clients, is some sort of education. And depending on the client's level of knowledge, it can vary. But how it starts is through process understanding, how the divorce process works. So, there's mediation, there is a lawyer, there are courts. Which one would work for you? I often try to tell my clients if they could first start with I call it the kitchen table discussion. if the marriage is in a place where the two individuals can sit down across from each other and kind of talk about what they want and what they think is fair, that's a great place to start. Not all couples start there. So then from there, we decide, is it mediation? Is it going directly to a lawyer? We kind of talk about what the first step should be. But even before that, what we talk about is their strategy. Like how do we want to approach your divorce? What are your negotiables, your non-negotiables? How do you think you want to see this play out? And we go through all the different scenarios so that they can talk through all of the different options and which one works best for them. I don't tell them they should go to mediation. Nope, you should go directly to a lawyer. I don't ever prescribe what a client should do. What I do is I give them options and I say to them, you understand your marriage better than me. Which one do you think works? Which one makes the most sense? And in some cases, we've had the kitchen table discussion and it goes sideways. So then the decision would be, in some cases, next is mediation. So then they go to mediation and that works. And in mediation, they're able to come to the conclusions and then from there develop a separation agreement. And even in mediation, I have clients going to mediation who aren't even sure what they're looking for, how it works. So I walk them through the mediation process. So I myself, through York University, have taken my family mediation certification so that I have a full understanding of that process. I don't plan to be a mediator. For me, it was about being educated and able to support my clients, especially through something like mediation. Because, a lot of couples now are moving towards mediation because the courts are bogged down. They take so much time, so expensive. So, if you can handle a mediation and come to an agreement and through that process, that's better than taking it to the courts 100%. So I prepare clients. And just recently, actually, I had a client who reached out to me as a sort of a first discovery call, and she happened to be going into her mediation the following week. And when we talked about it, she did want to set up time with me so that just before that mediation, she could go in prepared. And we spent an hour on the phone. We talked through, how mediation works. I helped her understand what her negotiables, non-negotiables are. She had already seen a lawyer, so she knew what her options were, what that sort of window was for spousal support. She knew what child support would be. And, with all of that information, we equipped her so she could go into mediation feeling confident. And interestingly enough, this was her second mediation. The first one went off the rails, as she said. It did not go well, and there was no conclusion. It was just a lot of arguing and back and forth. And so after she had this one, I asked her to email me after, and she emailed me after to say it went so much better than it could have gone. And she was very happy. And we continued to work together after that. So for me, when I hear that, it makes me really happy because I've helped someone through something that was very difficult. And when she went into her first mediation, she was high stress, really worried about what the outcome would be. And she told me that the second mediation, she didn't have that same anxiety that she had the first time. So that's part of what I want to do as well, is really prepare people so that, we talk about, as divorce coaches, we save, we can help and save in legal fees or court fees with some of the tactics that we use, but we also save you time and we save stress, right? We try to kind of show you that, I wrap my arms around my clients. I've got their best interest. I'm here for you. I have clients calling me, different times of the day. On the weekend, something goes off the rails. On the weekend, something goes wrong. They message me and we set up some time to go through it. So I'm like, a phone call away, a text away, and you don't always have that with your lawyer. So to have that support when things go wrong, I think is very helpful for my clients.
So, Jackie, how do you balance your role being a divorce coach? Because when I think about your name, it sounds kind of imminent, right? It's like you're not a relationship coach where it's like it could go either way. It's like when I see you, it's like I have my mind made up. And I'm wondering, is that a scary thing for some people to be across from you, knowing that it's like, oh, I made this commitment, I made it visible, I have to follow through now. How do you walk that line with your clients so you're not pushing them in one direction or another, or just really supporting them and meeting them where they're at?
Yeah, I'm never pushing anyone in any direction. What I do is I ask a lot of questions. I ask a lot of questions so that they they talk. I want them to talk more than me. I want to hear what they have to say. I want them to think it through in their mind and start to sort of put together all of the pieces. Sometimes it's really easy. I mean, I have a lot of clients that are in abusive relationships. Sometimes they're mental, financial, and even physical abuse. And as you're asking those questions and they're saying out loud the things that are happening to them, they start to realize, and something that they've been normalizing all along, as they're telling me, they start to realize it's not normal. And sometimes they ask me, they ask me questions like, well, is that normal or should that happen? And I'm very honest in those situations. I myself am in a very healthy, happy marriage and have been for 15 years now. And so, I know what a healthy marriage looks like, and I know what a marriage that isn't healthy looks like. And if they ask me the question, I will answer, but I won't offer it. So, it's that idea of like you give someone your opinion if they ask you for it, right? So I'm going to answer their questions, but I'm not going to push them in a direction and put labels as well. I mean, the label of narcissism comes up all the time. And I recently wrote on LinkedIn an article about malignant narcissism, which is really scary because a client had shared with me that her therapist had labeled is a strong word, but had talked about how some of her husband's behaviors are reflective of a malignant narcissist. And the stories were pretty horrific. So in a situation like that, I find that they come to their own conclusions. And when they don't, I have a lot of clients who meet with me and then I don't hear from them again, which, in most cases is because they stayed with the marriage. And when I do send a follow-up email, at times just to check in, because some of them were pretty heavy, they say I'm not ready and I'm like perfectly fine like that. You have to do what's best for you. So a lot of times I find as well when I have the conversations, the financial piece comes up. So, there's a lot of stay-at-home moms that are like, I don't have access to bank accounts and I can't afford to leave him. And so those are very difficult conversations to have because there's not a simple fix. And in fact, I was just on a call last week with a group of lawyers. We had a bit of a meeting where we talked a lot about some of the clients that I have and what their thoughts were. And I asked that question. I said, when they come and they don't have the money to pay for you, what do they do? Like, I thought these lawyers would have like a sort of a good answer on how to manage that. And they didn't.
Yeah.
Because and we do say, well, could you get your own credit card? Is there an opportunity to get a line of credit? Could you get a loan from a family member? So you do go through all the potential ways they could get money to help them in the meantime. But if they don't have it, then, it's very difficult. However, that said, in some of those situations, I have had clients move to a women's shelter. So if they're in a position where they have an abusive husband and they don't have the funds to do anything, they bring themselves and the child to a women's center, like a center that will then support them. They can get free legal advice. They have a place to stay to get their footing. And I've seen some of those women thrive after where they end up getting a job and they get themselves back on track. And, I'm always happy to see that. But that journey is one of the most difficult. Look, divorce is one of the most challenging things you'll ever go through, but there are different levels, right, of what you go through. And when you have to take your children to a shelter, that's, even more challenging and difficult.
You mentioned you wrote an article on malignant narcissism. I'm really
Mhm.
curious. What is that?
Yeah. So it's not an actual definitive diagnosis. So it's narcissism is, and it's not one of the DSM-5. If I said that right, the DSM-5, I believe they're called, where it's not a diagnosable condition, but it's recognized and talked about more and more. I mean, you have your narcissist where they're very self-centered and they care about themselves and they do these awful things. Malignant takes it to a whole other level. A malignant narcissist is destructive. So they do things to purposely hurt you.
Like
And
what?
they will say things to you that are so horrific and mean that they know will hurt you to your core. And they will feel good about that. Like if they can find what really is your Achilles heel, will hurt you the most, they will find that and they will say the most despicable things. I mean, some of the examples are horrific, and they will hurt you and they don't care. There is no empathy. There is zero lack of empathy. And I can share some horrific stories, not from my clients, but from conversations that I've had with other people in my circles where, they turn their own children against each other to the point where children become suicidal, or they hurt themselves because the parent is so horrific to them, because that parent doesn't even care about their child. They will isolate other people against you. They will isolate you so no one speaks to you. Isolation is huge because they don't want other people, they don't want you to share what's happening. So if they isolate you and tell you how awful all these people are and how they say terrible things about you, even though it's not true, they want to keep you for themselves. There is like a whole list of horrific behaviors. And it's interesting because they, as you sort of dig deeper, there's all these like different, because one of the things I asked when I was doing some research, I asked my friendly Claude AI, who are some historical individuals who could like be considered malignant narcissists. And Hitler came up as one, right? Like, so yeah, so I thought that was interesting, and among a few others. But it was just that idea that he said this is the way it is, and everyone is to believe him, and he got people rallied around him, and just that idea of how he was so charismatic and he was able to bring people to him, like millions of people, right, to do what he wanted, and whether they believed it or not, it didn't matter. He made them believe. So that's the sort of that's how it works. And I don't know if it's a good idea to talk about Hitler, but anyway, that was the one that came out in my mind.
In your experience, is that the number one reason for divorce?
Do you mean narcissism?
Yeah.
No, I've had all different types of clients with different reasons and different situations. I mean, I do I hear a lot of abuse, and I see a lot of women coming because their husbands are not good to them, for lack of a better word. But what I also see is, in the beginning, when I first started my practice, I actually found a lot of couples coming to me because they wanted to split amicably. And they just said to me, look, we don't know what to do. We don't want lawyers to turn us against each other. We know what we want to do. Can you help us? And while I don't focus my practice on that, I do help couples through it as well. And what I do is I'm like, okay, I educate them on the process. I explain how a separation agreement works. We talk together. So it's like that kitchen table discussion that I talked about earlier, except I facilitate it. And in all the cases where I work with the clients, they were all amicable. So there was no fighting in any of this, because as soon as you're not amicable, I'm not the one for you. So in these situations, they were amicable. They knew what they wanted. I actually did put together like a memo of understanding, which is kind of a little bit like what a mediator does. But because I wasn't really mediating, I didn't see it in that light. And I put it together, and then I found them each lawyers to help them put the separation agreement together. They signed it and they were done. Like, it was very, very simple. So in those cases, no, I mean, there's no issues there. And in some cases, I have clients telling me they just fell out of love, and they think their spouse is wonderful, and they feel off. These are the ones that I think have the most difficulty, because they think their spouses are wonderful, but they're just not in love anymore. And I think that's where it becomes a real challenge, where it's a little easier to leave someone who's abusing you. It's a little more difficult when you think they're a good person, but they're just not the good person for you.
Do they say why they're not in love anymore? When I think about that, I kind of wonder, is it just something that gradually just automatically leaves? What creates that falling out of love?
It's so interesting, Dwayne, because this area has been of interest to me for like almost my entire life. Because even when I thought back when I wasn't in a relationship and I wasn't married, I wanted to understand what I'm looking for in that person that I marry. So when I talk to people who are happily married or divorced, I always ask this question. So I feel like I've got so much data in my head. What I found in almost, I don't want to say all the cases, but the majority of the cases was, you know what, I just don't think it was ever right from the beginning. So I had one individual who told me that who was married, and I know this individual, and I was quite shocked to hear that they were splitting up, and they had been together 25 years. And so when I spoke to them, I said, "Oh, well, what, like, when did it go wrong?" And like, and they have, four kids. And the individual said, "Actually, when I was walking down the aisle, I questioned this relationship."
Wow.
And do you know how many times I hear that? And so I always use that as a cautionary tale to the young people in my life to say, like, when you know it's right, it's right. Like I'm very confident in saying that I didn't have a doubt in my mind. I knew it was the right move for me. I knew I wanted to marry this individual. There's not a question. And so you always hear, like, it's funny when I watch all these reality shows because I find those very interesting as well, how they're like, "Oh, everyone fights," and not at the beginning. Like there should not be serious fighting at the beginning. They're not should. And if you argue, silly things like the dishwasher or following too close on the highway or whatever it is, something small. If you're arguing over finances or, children, how many children you want to have or where you want, like when they're bigger arguments, that's where it gets a little scarier. And look, I've also run into people who just said it changed. I married them. I loved them. We had kids, and then everything just changed. So, and they changed, and I changed, and I grew up. And so there are those situations, but I'm always surprised by the number of people who tell me they kind of knew from the beginning.
That's very interesting
Mm,
because you to walk like that whole visual of walking down the aisle and having that thought in your head, that doubt it's just beyond me. And like I just think about that and I'm like, how hard is that for somebody? But I hear what you're saying. I think there is an evolution. I heard somebody say to me that I was talking to somebody who was a relationship coach, and she said that your partner is a new person every day, and it's your job in the relationship to really work and understand that person every single day. And I think that's where people maybe use marriage as that final destination, where it's like, okay, we made the decision, we know each other, we're getting married, but we're still not doing that work to understand how this person is evolving, what their needs are, and how they're evolving. So I think there's such an interesting dynamic there that plays into that. I'm curious. You have been in so many different areas. You've been a teacher, you've been a corporate communications leader, you've been a director level executive, and now you're a divorce coach. Tell us, how does that path come to here?
yeah. You know, yeah. It's so interesting. I just have the most non-linear career, but it makes sense in my head when I put it all together. I thought I would be a high school teacher for the rest of my life. I taught for 4 years, loved it, loved my students, loved the craft of teaching and learning, but I just didn't see a future in it. So I just didn't see myself doing that for decades and decades. It was not fulfilling me. So I moved to Italy for a year, bit of an eat, pray, love to figure myself out and what I wanted to do with my life. I came back, and it's very interesting. I did a lot of those, career questionnaires, and I went to the university and I talked it through what I want to do, and I had all these different options. And marketing and communications kept coming up. And when I dug into it, I really thought, oh, this is where I could use my creativity, also my learning from my teaching side. And so I did a 1 year program. I got my communication certification, and then delved into that world of marketing and loved it. I spent almost 10 years at Pfizer, working on, it was very much education focused on nutritionals. I love the area of nutrition. It's a personal interest to me, but I worked on the nutritional products like Centrum and Caltrate and Materna, which is, the multivitamin for pregnant women. And I did training programs, but I also did all the communications for that as well, for all those products that I worked on. And so loved it. And then from there, worked in agency for a bit and then landed at CIBC, where I had a number of roles there. And the last one, as you mentioned, I was the director of US marketing. And, that idea again of using my creativity and, what was really fun about working in the US is in Canada, everybody knows who CIBC is. In the US, virtually no one knows who CIBC was. So it was that whole idea of switching your mindset and getting to that place of like, okay, people don't know who we are. How do we fix that? How do we get them to know who we are? So very interesting challenge. And then my job got moved back to the US. So the director of US marketing was placed back in Chicago, which is where our head office was. And I had the choice to, I had a choice at that point in time. Like, what do I do? Do I stay in corporate? Do I leave? So I left, and I had been helping people through divorce for 20 plus years, or I have been helping people through. And so when I was making that decision about what my next move is, it kept coming up in my head, like, could I make this a career? Is this a thing? And so I met with a few family lawyers to say, hey, like, I'm thinking about this divorce coach, because I Googled it. I'm like, is this a thing? And I found divorce coaching, and it's a little more advanced in other countries like the US and the UK, but Canada, it's still a relatively new concept. So recognizing that could be a challenge. Again, I kind of put my eggs in one basket and spoke to these lawyers, and truthfully, if they had said, oh, I think it's a bad idea, do this instead, I probably wouldn't be doing this, but they were very encouraging. So I decided to embark on this and started my practice of divorce coaching. And truly, this is my calling. Like this, everything has come to this point because even my experience in teaching, and especially in corporate, I'm drawing upon all that experience. Working at large organizations, I almost recommend it to everybody because what you learn and take away from that is so powerful, and it really helps fuel you for the rest of your career.
That's so interesting because you mentioned that you've been doing it for 20 plus years. You've officially been a divorce coach for less time than that. So you were doing it informally. How did you become that person in people's lives that was this informal, as I called you before, the divorce whisperer?
Right. So you know what? I had a person in my life, the very first person to get divorced, who was in a really bad space. So she didn't know what to do, didn't know what to start. And I said, had three young children. I said, I got you. I'll figure this out. You just keep working through this, take care of your children, and I will be your project manager. I will help you run your divorce. So, I personally have never been through divorce, and most divorce coaches are. In fact, I haven't met a divorce coach besides myself who hasn't been divorced. But for me, this was the first divorce and I lived and breathed this. So I helped her with every aspect of her divorce. I came back. I'm like, here are your choices. What do you want to do? Okay, let's do that. I helped her figure out how to sell her home, how to get a mortgage for a new home, what new home works for her and her children. I sat in every single one of her legal meetings and took notes. So after we could debrief and talk it through, I can't even think one aspect of that divorce that I didn't help her through. I lived and breathed it and felt it. Like I felt what she felt. I mean, look, I say that, but of course she felt it deeper. She was the one with the children and all of the different challenges she was facing. But I felt like I really understood it. So after I supported her and it was done, and it took a long time because when child support's a part of it, it has to be looked at every year, and there's all these other aspects. So I kind of supported her through the years. But after I did that for her, someone in my life had said, oh my gosh, you helped her. Can you help me? Or can you help my friend? And can you help this person? And so I just kind of kept helping people side of desk, like as I was building my corporate career, I was supporting, I was learning, I was growing. And I just found so much joy when I got those wins, right? Like I think about one client I had who was about to, wrap up the divorce and came to me and said, look, can you just read through my separation agreement? I just want someone to kind of like walk me through it and I want to understand it. So I wasn't helping from a legal perspective because his lawyer had walked him through the separation agreement, but there were some terms he wasn't familiar with. And so we kind of went through it line by line and talked it through because I was very close to this individual. And I noticed that spousal support was missing. And there's a spouse. So I said, like, why is there no spousal support in here at the end? And they said, look, it was very contentious in mediation. we decided we couldn't agree. And then we just went to the lawyers and wrote up the separation agreement, and it was agreed upon that we weren't going to do it. And so I don't tell people what to do, but I give them options. And I said, okay, so just so you're aware, I need to let you know that when this comes up in 5 years, and this is what their lawyer had told them too, you're going to have to revisit this in 5 years, because once you've been married X number of years, there is going to be spousal support. And once your children are out of school, that's going to have to be revisited, which means you're going to have to go back to a lawyer, back to a mediator, pay a retainer, and go through this very difficult time that you're going through now. And he wasn't happy, but said, oh, like, I don't want to do that. And I said, look, I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm telling you that is going to be the outcome of not doing that now. The other outcome is you say, you know what, I just want to get it done now. And I don't mind if in 5 years I have to revisit it. But he took the first, which is he said, I don't want to revisit this. So we came up with like what we think could work and said, okay, take this to your lawyer, have a conversation. It went back and forth with lawyers for a little bit, came to an agreement, signed and done. And now, that individual, the 5 years has passed. And he says, I'm just so happy I did that, because I wouldn't want to be back paying lawyers, mediators, getting in fights over something that I might as well do it while we were in the trenches and in the thick of it. So that to me just feels like such a win, because I feel like I helped in an area, and not just at the time, but even like knowing that 5 years later, he's so happy he's not in that position. So when those situations come up, I feel like it's like, okay, that was a success. I helped change the trajectory of how that could have gone.
So you mentioned men. So you deal with men and women. What are some of the differences you notice with working with both those clients?
Yeah. Let me think about that for a second. So I think what's interesting is people think that men don't carry it the same way that women do. And I disagree with that. I have had so many men break down in tears and then be mortified in front of me because they broke down in tears. At which point I let them know there is zero judgment here. It is normal to have tears. That is something that, this is a really big life change. And so it's okay to have emotion. And, I've had some that have anger, and we try to work on that as well. I don't know if there's I think the big difference is women talk to their friends about it a lot. So there's a lot of conversations, a lot of chats with friends, sometimes like maybe even like too many chats where it becomes like that overcomes everything, and they don't even have that time with their friends because all the time is spent talking about divorce. Whereas with men, I don't think they have that support. From what I've seen, there are I've had a few clients where they're so happy because they have another friend who went through divorce, so they can talk about it one-on-one. But then when they're with their friends, it doesn't come up. So I would say men, are can be just as emotional as women, find it just as challenging, and feel it's just same sort of reaction, feeling uncomfortable, going into mediation, feeling uncomfortable going into court. So it's a lot of the same feeling. Sometimes it just looks a little different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. When I was looking at your site, you talk a lot about people often starting with a lawyer and spending like thousands just trying to get some sort of clarity. And obviously that's where you come in.
Yeah.
But what are people really paying for in those early legal meetings when they're not prepared?
Yeah. So, I've seen a lot of this firsthand. Oftentimes they're paying for legal education, which you do not need a lawyer to take you through. You need a lawyer for legal advice. Let's be clear. And I ensure, or I try to tell my clients that every single one should get legal advice, because that is so important. But legal advice is what they should share with you. And so what I'm finding is that they're getting legal information, asking some baseline questions about how spousal support works, how child support works. Can I sell the matrimonial home? What if he doesn't want to? All these pieces of information that you could get elsewhere. So could you get them could you ask ChatGPT? Could you go online? For sure. But even then, chat doesn't know your specific situation, right? So that's where a divorce coach comes and helps out, is that you share your specific information and we tell you we help you with that legal information and ensure that we're giving you information that is correct, right? Because that's the other thing too. I have clients coming to me saying that, they don't think they have to pay what they call alimony. And actually, alimony is the US term for spousal support. So they've, already there, they've got some misinformation. It's not alimony, it's spousal support. And so because AI is giving some incorrect information. So I try to help them with that. But the other thing they do as well is they tell their lawyer their story, and they tell it in a very long way. So I was recently working with a client, and we had the first meeting with the lawyer, and it didn't, in my mind, it didn't go well, because even though I prepped the client and said, give them high level what happened, they ended up on the call for 2 hours telling their lawyer very, very detailed information about their spouse. And it was very difficult for me, because even though I prepped them in advance, and I said, look, we want to use this time for these questions, they sort of went in a different direction. After that call was over, I know how expensive that call was. And so I had a debrief and walked them through it and said, look, we just spent this much money. And so they learned the hard way, even though I tried to prepare them. I think they needed to learn the hard way. The next meeting we had with their lawyer, they were very quiet. They kept it very brief. They had their questions, they asked, they took notes, and it was much more streamlined. So when you're spending an hour or more really digging deep into the emotional part of your marriage and sharing that with your lawyer, that's where you're spending money for no reason. You could be going to a therapist. We could be talking this through, and also strategizing. So again, you want to go to your lawyer with a legal strategy in mind and get them to weigh in on it. When you start sort of, whiteboarding or talking to your lawyer and really sort of being very high level, a lot of time is spent on the high level when that's something that you could do elsewhere. And I don't mean, again, giving legal advice, but let's talk about what all your options are. And you can talk through, oh, I think the kitchen table won't work for this reason, but if I do it this way, so we're talking it through, and you're not spending $5, $6, $1,000 an hour with a lawyer going through that. So that's where the money gets saved. And that's where the money sometimes gets misspent.
Interesting point. Now that I'm hearing you say that, you mentioned earlier that you spoke to some divorce lawyers prior to doing your divorce coaching, and they gave you the thumbs up. And to me, that didn't even make any sense. It's like you're taking money out of their pockets. I find it hilarious that they were supportive of that, but it makes sense.
I was gonna say, here's a very good point about that, actually,
Yeah.
is that the good lawyers, the ones who put their clients first, the ones who want the best for their clients, they will support a divorce coach, because they're busy already and they don't want to sit for 2 hours, 3 hours listening to, the stuff that's not their area of expertise, that they didn't go to school for. So are there lawyers that I hear from that aren't supportive of divorce coaches? Yes, because they do feel like I'm taking hours away from them. But the lawyers that I work with, or that I send my clients to, are the ones that are collaborative and who have called me to say, look, I think this client's not ready yet. I think, if you can work with them a bit more to get them to wrap their head around it and then send them back to me, that would be great, because I don't want them spending thousands of dollars that reflects poorly on me and have nothing to show for it. So the good lawyers are the ones that want it to be collaborative and care about how much money their clients are spending.
I'm glad you emphasized that.
Yeah.
So in your experience, what do parents typically misunderstand about the impact of divorce on their kids?
Yeah. There's this school of thought that divorce is going to ruin my child. I need to stay together because they are going to be so unhappy if we break up. And, in, I don't want to say most cases, but more often than not, that's actually not the case, especially when there are parents arguing, or there's violence happening, or, those situations are actually worse for the child than an actual divorce. It's, there are actually studies to show that children that are in households where there is arguing and fighting and violence, that is way worse than the children that have been through divorce. So just from an anxiety and stress and, from that angle, from a mental health angle, it's actually better to take them out of that situation rather than to keep them in that. And it's interesting, when I attend events, I have, obviously a lot of people who have been through divorce come up to me, but I also have a lot of children of divorce who are now 20 and have been through it come up to me as well. And I've had a few, which I feel like I should never be surprised, but I'm surprised all the time. But I've had a few now come to me and say that one in particular, three sisters, sat down with their parents and said, please get divorced. We do not want to live through this anymore. It is stressful. Every family event is stressful. Every family vacation is stressful. They actually asked their parents to get a divorce because they couldn't handle it. And some of the other individuals I talked to, it's that same sentiment, except their parents didn't break up. And they said, I really wish my parents had broken up because it was the worst. Christmas, they were fighting around, or like the holidays, they were fighting at dinner tables, they were fighting. It was just a constant negative, stressful experience for them. So I hear from so many kids telling me that they wish their parents divorced. And I think a lot of people in that situation don't know that. And I think it's really important to educate yourself and understand, okay, if I'm staying together only for the kids, is that a good thing? And there's a lot of literature that also talks to the fact that, it could be teaching children the wrong type of relationship to be in. And sometimes that pattern is repeated as a child. My parents fought all the time, so it's okay that I fight all the time with my spouse. That's normal. Or my dad hit my mom, so that's not a big deal. That's how it is. So they see there's a lot of cases showing that they actually repeat and choose to be in a relationship that was the same as their parents. So I'm not saying that's the same for everyone and that divorce is wonderful. Divorce is horrible. If you can circumvent that by marrying the right person and getting yourself in a relationship where you won't get divorced, no one can guarantee that, right? None of us can. But as much as you can, if you see the signs, think about it, do things to make sure that you're this is the biggest decision of your life. You can never be too picky. So I say be as picky as you need to be and make that decision. But look, if you make a decision and things change or you realize you made a mistake, that's okay too. Like divorce, there used to be a lot of shame around it. I still do get women coming to me saying, I feel like I failed. I feel like I'm ashamed. And there's so much great literature for them to read to say, do not be ashamed. You did not fail. You and 40% of the population have gone through that, which says something, right? That it's a mistake a lot of people make, and that's okay. Sometimes it takes more courage to get out of a relationship, right? So, there's a lot of things that swirl around in people's heads, and children is the biggest one. And, there's a lot of other things with children too, like a lot of, especially women, I find, they don't want to lose the matrimonial home. They don't want to move out of the home because they think children need to stay here. They need to have that same continuity. They need to have their same friends. And that isn't always the best decision either on a couple of different levels. So sometimes children have bad memories of that house. And there's something very powerful about a fresh start in a new place and a new bedroom, and they get to redesign it. And so, leaving the matrimonial home, again, it's not always what the mother thinks it is, which is a bad experience. And oftentimes women especially, will stretch themselves financially to stay in that home. And then that impacts the children in other ways. We can't do this, we can't do that, I don't have the money. And it becomes, a real drain. And there's a lot to keep up, especially if it's a bigger home. I've seen women struggling, like the things are breaking down and this needs replacing and I can't afford it, so I'm leaving it. So, I feel like there's all these beliefs of how children feel about divorce, and by doing reading, and actually, I know I keep coming back to the therapist, but talking to it through with a therapist as well is very helpful because they can help you unpack a lot of that and figure out where those feelings are coming from.
Interesting. Every time I think about divorce, I think about this image of of the roses, right? You
Right.
just think about this like blow up battle, fisticuffs between two people. Now, here's the thing. There are plenty people who probably have a pretty, let's say, decent relationship where there
Right.
isn't a lot of high temper and high aggression, however, or even animosity. But however, when they decide on to divorce, then things could potentially escalate. So how do people going through divorce protect themselves without going to war. So it's like they're holding their own kind of boundaries, but they're still being strategic. But that communication part and trying to get to the a place of I guess agreement just becomes so volatile. How do people navigate that?
Yeah, that's always the worst when it gets to that situation. And, I have a lot of people reaching out to me to just say, to have a phone call with me to say, I wish I met you earlier. I wish I met you before I got divorced because it got to a state where it was, you know, years in court, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees on both sides. And that's not unheard of. That sounds like it's a lot, but it's actually not. It's very common to spend six figure on each side on legal fees, especially when you start to go, to war and things get escalated. What I find is if you engage someone like myself, a divorce coach in advance, what we do is we try to take the, I mean, I'm not saying that we stop you from going to court because no one can ever control that. But what we can control with you is the communications with your ex. So we've been trained in ways to help you reply so that it is not inflammatory. And when they send you a nasty text that says all these awful things about you, sometimes people, their knee-jerk reaction is to write things back and say awful things too, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, right? So if we can, unpack that message and say, yes, what they're saying is awful and it's wrong, and we can acknowledge that and talk it through. But then we say, okay, let's try to respond in a way where you're going to get what you want out of that. Responding in a nasty way is not going to get what you want. So I found that I had one client and there was a lot of arguing between lawyers. So, they didn't want their children to go to their father's house with the iPads because they purchased the iPads, and he is not getting the iPads. We purchased them, and the iPads are staying in my home. And there were legal letters going back and forth about legal emails back and forth about the iPads. And so I said, okay, let's talk the iPads out for a second. And when we started to unpack it, we realized that it was control, right? So she had been in a situation where she had no control. He was very controlling. And for her, it felt like by keeping the iPads, I'm in control. And we looked at both scenarios. Okay, what if you let them take the iPads? What's that going to look like? What's going to happen there? Like where would they take them? And well, what if he keeps them? Okay, well then that's when we can take action. And but what if they take them and he makes sure agrees to give them back when you come back? And so we talked that scenario out. And even the fact that the children will now have to have separate iPads all loaded with the same games and everything. Like it just becomes, why would they have two when they could just have one? So we talked it out and we kind of stopped that from happening. And we crafted a message and said, okay, they can have the iPads, but they need to come back with them every time. And, there's all these sort of parameters around it. And we stopped it. And then going forward, whenever that came up, like, I don't want them to, we talked it out and we tried to kind of do it in a way that they wouldn't have lawyers going back and forth, because the number of iPads you could buy with the amount of money spent back and forth with lawyers is, more than four. Like, do you know what I mean? So when you put it into context, like I saw a great, actually, somebody posted on LinkedIn about how two people were fighting over an air fryer. And, the comment was, you just spent $2,000 fighting over an air fryer. Like, it was just so ridiculous. Right. So, these situations, we try to support and help, and we know ways to communicate where it's like much more, it's firm and it's fair, but it's taking out all of the angry things. I mean, look, we talk it out. We let them say their words so that they get them out and they feel like, okay, I got them out. But we don't let them say those words to the spouse. And we find that in those situations, and I find in those situations, I feel like it really stops a lot of the back and forth for sure, and that escalation piece.
That's interesting because what you're saying there ultimately is no matter how big or small these objects are, whether it's a home or whether it's an air fryer,
Yeah.
it's really more about control. And when I think about this, and two people who have built a lot of these things together, most of these things together,
Yeah.
does it end up being not just about control, but then it evolves into winning? So at some point, it's like, it's not even about the fact that I want this air fryer, or even control to some degree, but now I just want to win. I want to make sure I walk out of this feeling as though I got my cake and ate it too. How much does that play a role into these situations?
Oh, a lot. And, you especially see it when people start dividing the household, right? So, I mean, one of the most painful things to do is decide who gets the cutlery, who gets the dishes, I get these 5 cups, you get those ones. That's where it becomes, it gets quite out of control where like, I have seen people fighting over toilet plungers, like not even a joke, right? So you just think, oh gosh, you could buy one at Home Depot for like nothing, and you're fighting over it because it's exactly what you just said. That one isn't control. It's I want to win. I said I wanted that, so I'm going to get that, right? So it's and this again where we talk about, okay, like what if they get this and you get that, so we try to again temper that and try to lose that winning, but in some cases, we try as much as we can, but in some cases you just can't win. And especially, going back, this is why it's so important to understand all of the different permutations of everyone's divorce, because if you're dealing with someone, for example, who's a malignant narcissist, if you think that's who you're dealing with, it's going to be a battle. You're not going to win, and you're probably going to go to court because they don't care, right? They have no limitations. They want to punish you. They will do whatever they can to show they're right and you're wrong. And, those are the worst case scenarios where your client is going to be spending a lot of money on court and you don't want them to. But again, as a divorce coach, that's like, so why would you pay for a divorce coach when your lawyer can take care of the case for you, right? Because you spend less hours with your lawyer. We talk things through. I help you write the emails. You try to avoid, and when it's in court, you can no longer send, there are some limitations with that. But even, I had one client, who was writing an email to her lawyer that we were working on. And it was literally like this. It was the longest email you've ever read. And the only piece that the lawyer needed was literally 3 sentences. That was the legal piece, because the other individual in court was saying they were a terrible mother, they weren't feeding their child right, they weren't doing, there was all these awful things they were saying. This individual got very defensive and they said all the things they're doing for their children and look what I'm doing. And, it doesn't matter. Like, I get that and it feels good to say that, but for your lawyer, this is all that matters. So again, if she had sent that email to her lawyer, he would have had to read, as he's reading, time's going on, reading these pages, and then he has to take the time to pluck that particular piece out. And that's what he needed. And oftentimes there's a lot of emails sent to lawyers and every email costs you. So by again stopping that and helping people be more thoughtful and focusing on what their lawyer is asking them for, that's where we come into play. So we have those, like I oftentimes with my packages, I have weekly meetings with my clients. And so if they're dealing with things every week, okay, like what did your lawyer send you? Let's look through it. What do you have to provide them with? All your financials. Okay, let's get your NOA. Let's use the proper, like I help them organize right down to helping them open files on their computer and using the proper nomenclature. Okay, this is going to be your NOAs. This is going to be his. So we get it all set up. So when their lawyer asks them for that information, they have it ready to go. They don't have to go through their clerk and pay for it. They don't have to have the lawyer explain it. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago. I attend a monthly meeting with a group of junior lawyers, and I listen into some of their challenges. And, one of the lawyers, she was so lovely. I was like, okay, you're a collaborative lawyer, and I love this. So she was saying how she's having to chase after her client every week to get all of the financials that are needed. And she felt awful because she said, I'm billing all these hours to chase them on their financials. And so she felt awful. And, I, of course, was like, oh, that's what I do. Like, I help them get that together so you don't have to do that and charge them X number of dollars an hour, right? We meet weekly and we start to collect them. And what I find with a lot of people going through divorce, these are people who have busy jobs. They have children. They don't have a lot of time. And when your lawyer's saying, can you send me ABC from 2019? And, they're like, oh, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. They push it aside because there's so many other pressing things happening. So when I organize it for you and we spend 1 hour a week getting all that together, it's so much easier than you getting stressed out from an email from your lawyer because you're missing this or you're missing that. we do it so that you're not missing pieces. And if there is something missing or something more they need, then I work with you on how to easily save that and send it to them. So that's the sort of work that we do to try to help in that from that perspective.
Interesting. When you think about the couple and they're going through this win mentality, this perspective, I can imagine obviously you've dealt with that on many occasions. Has there been a success that you recall where somebody was just so focused on winning and you're able to get them to change perspective? What was that core thing that helped that person see it more neutrally versus needing to come out on top?
So I'm going to give a different perspective because when you said that, it made me think of something that I haven't shared yet, which is so upsetting to me. And I've seen happen with people that came to me after the fact because the other side and look, I work with, mostly women. I think I mentioned and I don't think I mentioned this, but I think if I was to think about it, probably like 75% women, 25% men. It's mostly women, just because of the nature of what I do and who I surround myself with. But what I find is that the other side, the men want to win so badly. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of situations, these are narcissists or, people who are individuals who have no limits. And I find women give in all the time. I find these stories where I hear women saying that they even give in child support because they just don't want to deal with it. And they give up spousal because he just keeps coming hard at them and she doesn't want to deal with it anymore. So she gives up. Sometimes it's in court. Sometimes it's in mediation. Sometimes it's with lawyers. But I have seen the women who come to me, as I mentioned earlier, and said, I wish I met you earlier, or who come to me afterwards and say that I wish I met you earlier, they gave up. And so that to me is where the winning piece is really painful. When someone it's just, and I understand why they don't fight. It's very difficult to fight, especially if you don't have someone in your corner. And I'm working with a client right now whose spouse is not paying the amount of child support they should be paying. And they haven't been for years. And so they've been asking and saying, well, you should, and they just keep saying, oh, sorry, I'm just going to send this to you. Like they know what they're doing, right? They're playing the system a little bit and making it like I am paying you child support, but they're not paying as much as they should. And they're playing a game. And so she's been playing this game for years and she was telling me about it. And she's like, can you help me? And I said, yes, I can. And this is how we're going to deal with it. So we came up with a strategy. We worked together to say, this is what you should be paying by law. And we had to take some serious steps and some serious measures, but that individual had to pay child support retroactively. And now they're paying what they should be paying in child support moving forward. Mm-hmm. So, in these situations, like there's a lot of people giving up in the courts, a lot, and it's very painful to see.
Many people think about the end of a divorce, who they're going to be after everything is said and done. What would you say to somebody who's venturing into divorce or thinking about it as they're contemplating that mystery of who they're going to be when it's all over? What would you say to them?
These are the discussions that I actually really like to have because this is where it turns to the positive. Again, not that divorce is positive because it is absolutely not. But when I have women in these situations where they are unhappy and, whether they're being harmed or they're just not feeling love, I ask them, where do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself in the future? Right? So we talk about how do you see yourself now and how do you see yourself outside of this marriage? And we talk it out. In some cases, women light up and they say, oh, I really want to get like a small house on the water. I'm thinking here, my kids will, they have these grand ideas of what they want. Others aren't sure and they have to talk it out. I don't know what's going to make me happy. Like I've always wanted to travel. Maybe I'll travel. Okay, well, where do you want to travel? So we kind of tease out the things that make them happy and we try to get them to see a place where they will be that they want to be. And it's interesting. I have a client who, he lived in a beautiful large house and he had to rent. So he had to be in a basement apartment because the house wasn't sold yet. And they didn't have the money. And so he had no choice to rent. And a lot of people have very negative feelings about renting. And that's something we talk about as well, because it's okay to rent for a period of time to get your footing back. It's easier, less of a lift every day. Things don't break down. It's just somebody else takes care of everything. So there's something to be said about renting, for a period of time while you sort of get your footing back. But he said to me, I lived in this beautiful house, amazing backyard. It was like probably everyone's dream. I'm in this basement apartment now, and I'm happier than I've ever been. I love my space. I read in this corner, like, see this corner here, I put a chair, I read there. I go out back sometimes. I like to listen to the birds. So he was kind of telling me how happy he was in this basement apartment. And a lot of people would like think, well, that's odd, but I get it, because he was feeling very empty, very sad, very unhappy in that household. And this was now his space, and he felt lifted. And so I have these wonderful conversations with my clients after the fact to hear how happy they are, and they landed in a space where they're way better. And so for me, honestly, those are the conversations I love to have.
That's amazing. Well, I've called you the divorce whisperer. um, an individual who has experienced so much in life in different roles and different capacities, but this is the one constant that you've now made your reality, your everyday. And I know you're bringing a lot of fortune to people during a time that most think is unfortunate. So that being said, I know there's a younger version of you out there that through your experience would love to hear what you would have to say years later. So this is where I turn it to you to read that letter to your former self.
Okay. So I have my letter, and this was such a fun exercise, Dwayne. I really enjoy this because truthfully, this is something I've never done before. Okay, here we go. Dear Jackie, it's 2005, and Kelly Clarkson's song, Since You've Been Gone, is playing in the background. True story, and I know the irony. You turn it off because your friend is sitting at her kitchen table and she is crying. She tells you that her husband has just left to be with his mistress. A marriage she thought was solid is suddenly gone. Her 3 kids are upstairs watching a movie. You sat with her for hours and then days, and you listened. And then you started learning. There is very little online support for divorce, no divorce roadmap, and there was no AI. It's 2005. But your uncle was a judge, so he became your resource. Together, you made a list. What needs to happen this week? What can wait? When does she need to call her lawyer? You didn't know it back then, but the simple list would become the foundation for the 30, 60, 90-day divorce plan that you use today. And that kitchen table becomes the beginning of hundreds of conversations with women going through divorce, hours and hours of professional training for yourself, and eventually owning your own business. You were a high school teacher. Then you left to build a career as a corporate leader. And while building your career, you continued to support people for the next 20 plus years through divorce. So you never planned to become a divorce coach, but you just couldn't stand by and watch people navigate divorce alone. You kept asking yourself, what do people do when they don't have a Jackie Santin in their corner? That question became your why. You thought you were helping a friend, but unbeknownst to you, you were building your life's work as a divorce coach. All the best. Love, Jackie.